So it is 3:32. I know that we are going to have a number of other folks kind of trickle in over the course of this webinar, and it is being recorded. And so mainly what we're going to do is walk through what is the Water Data Prize, what are the categories, and kind of some general questions that we thought y'all might have, and then open it up for a discussion with anyone here and any questions that y'all had. My name is Jessie Norris. I am a senior policy analyst at EPIC, focusing on water and technology policy. So the Water Data Prize is a fun blend of both of those, and I am joined by my colleague, Maureen Cunningham. We're going to use the chat in this session, so feel free to add questions along the way. We will hold the questions to the end, but feel free to ask at any point. And I will turn it over to Maureen.
Hi, everyone. Thanks, Jessie. I'm Maureen. I'm the Deputy Director for Water at EPIC, and here is our amazing EPIC team. We are a growing organization. This is our current staff, including Harry, who started this week. We're based in Washington, D.C. We are focused on developing policies that improve the speed and scale of environmental outcomes. And that's the work that we do. Although today we're focused on one aspect of our work, our other work covers environmental markets, restoration and mitigation, a bunch of other things. Endangered species, that was the one I was looking for. And then of course, Jessie kind of straddles between the water and the data and technology pieces. So that's who we are. I'm going to move on. Why are we doing this prize? And you all remember President Biden earlier in the year started bringing a lot of attention to lead service lines. We at EPIC were focused on lead before this, but he's brought a lot of attention, and we hope by the end of this month, Congress will bring some additional funding. But we know that funding is not the only solution to this problem. We also know that lead pipes were largely installed a century ago, and really they have no place in the modern world. It's a very solvable problem to replace lead service lines, but it does require some innovation and the funding as well. There's roughly 11,000 municipalities across the country that have lead service lines. So, and many of them don't even know where they are and don't have the resources to find them and replace them. So that's essentially why we decided to launch this prize focused on lead in drinking water. So we, at the end of this year, we're expecting the lead and copper rule revisions, the federal regulations on lead to become effective. They haven't been updated since 1991, so we're anticipating that these revisions will go into effect soon. And the new federal regulations carry a lot of new requirements for municipalities. And I'll talk about that in a minute, but all of these new federal regulations require municipalities to really get out there and focus on lead and drinking water. But we also work with and have seen a lot of smaller municipalities, and we define small differently than others, maybe 5 to 80,000 people, don't always have the resources. They don't always have the capacity or finances to find their lead lines or even to start replacing them. So anticipating those federal regulations, we devised this water data prize to kind of mirror the parts of the new federal regulations that we thought that municipalities would need help on. So we're going to talk about them in greater detail in just a few minutes, but the 4 categories of the new water data prize are first inventory. And so that's developing an inventory of lead lines and known and suspected lead lines in a municipality. Mapping is actually visually showing. A lot of bigger municipalities do have maps online, but making that information accessible to residents so they can look on a map and see where the lead lines are in their community. Equity, we know that lead lines tend to be concentrated in low-income areas, communities of color, indigenous communities, and we want to make sure that any programs intended to replace lead service lines are equitable. And then the last category of our award is communications. And there's several pieces of new communications that will be required in the lead and copper rule revisions. So we added that as a key place that we want people focused on.
Perfect. And just to note, as it says here, we anticipate that you might want to submit to more than one category. You are more than welcome to do that, and that is encouraged. And so one thing that we did and had noticed with the last water data prize is that we want it to really be open to folks outside of the water sector, or those that might not be really well versed in the lead and copper rule revision. So we just wanted to walk through some examples of what we're looking to improve, what the baseline is right now in some of these examples, and where's there an opportunity to build upon each of these categories in the prize. And so the first is inventory. And really, as Maureen was saying, is, what tools and data can help utilities or municipalities determine the location of their lead water pipes? And so there's a couple of different questions that we're looking to answer. Really, when it comes to predictive mapping tools or the information that you might want to use. And we recognize that that can take a lot of different forms. And so submissions can range from criteria or guidelines for how you might want to think about doing an inventory, the actual algorithms that you might be using, or an app that could be used by a municipality or community advocates or the water system itself. And one thing that we'll note kind of throughout this is we are not retaining any of the IP as part of this prize. That is still held by the entity that is making the submission. And so the next example is mapping. So how to quickly and efficiently gather information and display that information about where lead pipes are. We're thinking about how do you make this useful to non-GIS experts? How do you think about, are there templates that a municipality could use and just be ready to go? Or what are the design criteria that they need to be thinking about when they are displaying maps to the public? And so these can be static mockups, or can be based on real data. It really is kind of up to you and your expertise in that field. And again, can be thinking about a map or an interactive website. And so some examples of the maps, one that we like to point to is a better example is DC Water. And so what you're seeing here is every single house is labeled. They tell you the likelihood of there being lead or not. So do they know that for sure, or are they guessing based on some kind of predictive algorithm or otherwise? Also telling you, is that on the homeowner side or the city side? Because that's a kind of a distinction that is important when we're thinking about displaying this information and then removing the lead pipes. And so this is available, clear indication, and kind of I as a resident might know what's going on in my neighborhood as a result of looking at this. Another example is Boston, where I am currently based, where I look at this and I'm immediately confused as to what's going on. It doesn't indicate where the lines are. There's a lot of dots on this map, and I'm left a lot more confused than I did walking into looking at this or seeing it online. So those are kind of some examples, and obviously we can think about how you can improve the mapping beyond these, but just kind of wanted to share where some cities are to date. And I will pass it to Maureen to talk about equity.
So equity is a big issue when you're talking about lead service lines, lead pipes, because these pipes tend to be concentrated in older houses, in older cities, and even in older neighborhoods in cities. They, for a lot of those reasons, they especially impact low-income people, residents, communities of color, and so it becomes an equity issue. In addition to the fact that in most places, part of the lead service line is actually owned by the homeowner or landlord. In fact, the lead service line goes from, if you don't know what it is, goes from the water main to the house. And usually the half that goes up to the curb stop is owned by the municipality or the water utility, and the curb to the home is owned by the homeowner or landlord. So we know there's an equity issue in replacing them. We do usually support programs that cover the cost when there is funding available, that cover the cost of the full replacement. But we also want to push the envelope here through this water data prize in how we can create more equitable lead service line replacement programs? How can we ensure that we focus on the communities that have the highest levels of lead poisoning and known lead service lines? How do we prioritize them? We don't have an example here. We're still looking because there is an example that we know of today in devising either some kind of screen or some kind of criteria or some kind of definition that will lead to more equitable lead service line replacement. So this is where we're hoping to see a lot of creativity and obviously equity. So the fourth and final category for the awards is communications. Like I said, if you go through the lead and copper rule revisions, which we should actually post a link to, but you can also Google it. There's tons of documents out there. We know that communicating about lead in drinking water and as part of those regulations is a really important thing. In fact, one of the municipalities we work with has talked about once you lose that trust of the public, it's hard to build it back. So communications and getting out in front of the lead issue is really important, especially because as communities are going to be doing inventories and mapping, there's going to be more information, more awareness about lead. So that communications is key. And we do have an example. So the first example, this is an actual letter sent to a colleague of ours actually in Wisconsin. I'm not going to name the municipality, but it was sent to him to let him know that the municipality in question here knows that this resident has a lead service line and offers to pay for the replacement of that lead service line. But what we noticed right away is there's lots of text, there's no visuals. There's nothing that would, if I got this, it might end up in the recycle bin with other kind of sort of junk mail, so to speak, even though it's not, because there's nothing that kind of expresses any kind of danger or risk there. The wording in the actual letter, I know you can't read it, but it talks about lead laterals. And even though I work on, lead in drinking water, I don't use the word lateral a lot. That's definitely not a word that people are walking around talking about. So even the language that's used, there's no visuals. In case there was a different language spoken in that home, they would not have access to this letter. So this, we don't want to say it's a terrible example because we know our colleague did answer this letter and get his lead replaced, but there's room for improvement. And this, is an example of Philadelphia water, and you can go actually look this up online, I think, and look at it. But what we see in this example is a lot more visuals. It's an interactive website. It's gives clear guidance about what's going on. You don't see it here, but Philadelphia also has a video that explains what's going on. They use very easy language. This resource is available in multiple languages. And they also make this bright and interesting to look at. We would add to this is we also know that a website isn't enough. If you're a community advocate, sometimes going door to door is what's needed. So using multiple methods of communication is also important. So we're looking for innovation in those areas. So in the end, what are we trying to do? And what we're trying to do is ensure that we not just do lead service line replacement, not just replace all lead service lines, as Biden said back in April, because that could honestly take a lifetime at the pace that we're currently going. Our back of the envelope calculation is that at the pace we're going, it would take roughly 100 years to get rid of all the lead service lines in the United States. So we're trying to do this faster, more efficiently, and more equitably than what we think it would be happening without this innovation. So the Water Prize will hopefully accelerate this innovation, spur new ideas and solutions that can be brought to the table to help the municipalities that are struggling with lead or may not even know they have lead, get the lead out.
Perfect. And so just transitioning a little bit, we're gonna walk into like, what are all the nitty gritty details of the prize? What does that mean? So just eligibility, it is for folks that are 18 years or older. You can participate in a team or as an individual. If you do want to receive the prize money, you have to have at least one team member based in the US with a social security number. But as we said at the top of this, we really want it to be open to both folks inside of the water sector and outside of the water sector. The 2020 Water Data Prize was a great example of folks from academia, from water utilities, from startups, municipalities, just a range of folks that can participate and provide information and knowledge that can go into that toolkit that municipalities can use to evaluate where their lead pipes are. So the timeline that we're looking at, as y'all know, maybe that the prize was launched on September 15th. We are receiving applications through November 12th, and the winners were hoped to be announced by December 1st. Currently, there's $15,000 in the prize category, but that actually has been growing, and we expect that to continue to grow over the course of this over the course of the prize. So stay tuned. The Water Data Prize website will be up to date with all the information and latest stats on what could be won through this prize. And so the last thing we want to talk about was just the judging criteria. This, we do elaborate on what each of these components mean on the website, but a couple of things just to call out is really priorities. So making sure that there's creative ways that the most important information stands out and makes sense. When we think about accessibility, it's not just that it's online, but that it is in multiple languages, that it might be ADA compliant, that there's different voices that are communicating different information. So accessibility can be kind of a broad range. Of course, at Epic, we're thinking about innovation and what are some emerging or established technologies that could be used in a novel way. As Maureen mentioned, these current regulations are from 1991. So when we think about what could we do in 2021, we imagine there's a lot of improvements that could be made. And then lastly is ease of implementation. A lot of our partners that we work with at Epic are often in under-resourced communities, and we want to think about how can this be utilized by them in low cost or easily understood ways. So those are kind of like the main things that we're thinking about in the judging. And kind of a sneak peek of the judges, we'll announce them fully next week, but we really have a range of leaders across community advocacy, technology and data, communications firms, and regulatory expertise. And we kind of want that judging pool to be representative of the different categories that we're using, as well as the different types of folks that could be benefiting from this information. So we're really excited by the judges to date. And again, next week, we will launch the full list of judges. And back to you, Maureen.
And I see some really good questions coming in, so we'll wrap this up. We see that the best, and maybe this answers one of the questions I saw there, but we see that what is going to be submitted could be used as best practices and examples that can be compiled. And we, as part of the follow-up and implementation phase after the prize is over, we will compile them and share them with EPA and other agencies and municipalities. The idea is really municipal water utilities and other utilities would be the implementers. So if someone develops a great template for a map, the end user is really the municipal water utility, or some water utilities are not municipally owned, they're privately owned. It could be any water utility. So those are the end users that we see from some of these ideas, because they're the ones that have to comply with the federal regulations. So as part of the follow-up, we'll compile and share the examples with the EPA and municipalities. We know that the EPA is very interested in new ideas ideas, and we hope to see them implemented in the end, or we hope to see some kind of state agency or other regulators kind of encourage the implementation of the good ideas. And of course, we can work with the municipalities themselves. We, as part of some of our other work on lead, we already work with various municipalities, so encouraging or working with that interested municipalities to implement these ideas would be the next phase after we get the good ideas. So I think we're at the question phase. I started to answer some questions in there. The first question is about the law, the new regulations. Does the law cover utility municipal replacement or also support for landlords, owners to replace in buildings? So the new regulations isn't tied to funding, so it doesn't actually cover anything. It does, in the language, move towards full service line replacement, which, for those of you who are not in the lead world, partial lead replacement is when only the public side of the line is replaced. And that actually can be really dangerous for a household, because it kind of stirs and shakes up the pipe, and it can actually lead to more lead, or, you know, if there was no lead, it can lead to lead in the homeowner's side of the pipe. So we encourage full service line replacement, replacing the full pipe. The regulations move in that direction, though it's not a clear ban on partial lead service line replacement in the new regulations. That said, and I didn't mention this in my response, there's, I think, 6 states, I could be counting them wrong, most recently Illinois and New Jersey, who have banned partial lead service line replacement. And there's new funding, specifically in the reconciliation package that is still in Congress, as we know, hopefully coming out of Congress this month. But interestingly, the reconciliation package on lead includes a very clear ban language on banning partial service line replacement, and specifically tying it to the funding. So the funding can't be used for partial service line replacement, which is a great strategy. So we like that. So that's a long-winded answer to that. The next one I think is we answered, but I think we answered that. The end user is, maybe Jesse, you can comment on that.
Yeah, I'm happy to speak to that. So the intended end user of the information, as Maureen mentioned, is primarily the municipalities that are going to be, or water systems that are implementing this. From the 2020 Water Data Prize, what I can say is that we've worked with regulators that are thinking about the state regulators that are making templates for water utilities or systems. So we can also think about a world in which this compiling of best practices lands in their desk, and then they're the ones helping to disseminate the information with the water systems in their state. And we also work with community advocates that are also in a different role, thinking about communications and design and visualizations on behalf of the areas that they work in. So it can be a mix, but I think, yeah, primarily the water systems that are going to be responsible for compiling and visualizing this information first and foremost. I think the next question is about the prize money and the different categories. And I'll stop sharing my screen, since I think now is more of a conversation. So right now, it is $15,000 total that we have in our prize pool. But as I mentioned, like, honestly, every week we're potentially getting more funding for this prize. So we expect that to continue to grow. We do have 4 categories that you can submit in, but to be frank, we're not sure if we're going to have like a combination of different submissions, or some, you know, that span across different categories. So jury's still out in terms of if we have an award or a prize per category, or if it becomes kind of a blend of those that stand out the most. Last year, we had 1 first prize winner and then kind of 4 honorable mentions. So it might be kind of a mix there. But again, we'll keep the website up to date with how much prize money there actually is in the end, and what that ends up looking like.
Great. And we have another question. Can you speak a little bit more about the privacy and sharing of the data, IP, ideas, et cetera, that you receive?
Yeah, definitely. So everything will be submitted through an online portal. The judges will then evaluate that information, but we will not retain that. It really is your IP. And then if we do think about sharing that, it would be with your consent, and probably, we would promote you in connection with someone else if we're trying to make that introduction of the work being applied or used by a municipality or by another group. I think more concretely, what we did last year was we wrote up, here is the best practices, and featured the different winners throughout that report. But that wasn't sharing algorithms or mapping or the actual templates. And then we facilitated introductions between the winners and different folks that could implement that information. So that's kind of what we imagine as being more of the convener or connector of the winners to the people that could potentially implement it.
So Jesse, I'm going to read the next one. If you want to start, and I'll try and wrap if anything's still hanging. Given that public water systems are the end users of this information, should the scope be limited to lead service lines alone? The reason I ask is because EPA violations of the lead rule are specific to the public water systems as a whole, and seldom have anything to do with lead service lines.
That's a great question. And I think it kind of speaks to how interconnected a lot of these things are. And I think what we're ultimately trying to say is, for this prize, it really is related to lead and what best practices should we think about in lead communications. But the ultimate goal is for a consumer to know, is my water safe to drink or not? And so it's, what do we need to be thinking about in terms of the design, communication styles, practices for a consumer to answer that question. So if your submission kind of is a little bit broader than just a lead, I think that's okay, but maybe we can follow up afterwards if you have something more concrete in mind.
So, and I would just say, we did a water data prize last year that was highly successful. We had, I think up to 30 submissions, and that was a more generic, generic's probably not the right word, but more focused on water quality reporting as a whole. So we did do that, and just knowing that the lead and copper rule revisions were coming down the line, we decided to focus this on lead. So another question, would the funds be split if you had more than one level? For example, first prize plus honorable mentions, or are we still deciding?
So I think what we have in mind right now is that we would have like a first place per category. But again, that really depends on what the nature of the submissions ends up being. So stay tuned. If you're trying to get first, it could happen in a couple of different ways.
Any other questions? And you're welcome to come off video or just raise your hand you don't need to use the chat if it can be more of a discussion, since there's only 15 of us on the call. Go ahead, Kat.
I'm gonna have to run really quick, but I did want to, so basically this is, you're working with utilities, but utilities provide lots of different functions of different audiences. So they may have a program for multifamily unit homeowners, or a program for people in a certain part of the community, or a program for businesses, or a program for their board members, or whatever. So it would be something that would be appropriate for public water systems, but the end user of the communications or the guidance or the how to test your own water or whatever could be different than, it's not necessarily something internal to the utility.
I think it could be both, right? I mean, the inventory process is a tool that a water system would use. The mapping could be, what is the actual tool that I'm using to map and display this information, or what app might I be using to gather the data itself? So that could be like resources for a public water system. When we think about then displaying that information to the consumer, that would be, again, could be mapping, the templates, like what design criteria do I need to have in mind, or the communications piece.
Right. But not necessarily like, this is utility and this is the public. This great, there's all sorts of different publics, and there are all sorts of different potential audiences for a specific, who are going to have a specific interest, like what a the building owners are going to have a different interest from. Yeah. Okay. All right. We'll put something together.
And yeah, I don't see any other questions. Jesse, maybe you want to just spend a minute on the implementation of last year's water data prize. It might be interesting to people to hear, what's happening with that.
Yeah, I'm happy to share. So if this is helpful context for what we might be doing, we have a couple of different initiatives coming out of the 2020 Water Data Prize. The first, as I mentioned, was we wrote kind of a compiled best practices. Here are all the things that you need to keep in mind with respect to water quality communications. And we presented that at a number of conferences, a number of webinars. We were able to elevate the different submissions through those kind of like public events about what we learned. We also then have more targeted pilots working with utilities in Virginia, for example, where we're actually helping them improve the templates and working right alongside them and community advocates in that area, using a template that was developed as part of the Water Data Prize. So they're directly implementing those pieces. And then we're also working with state regulators in a couple different states to improve the template across the board, which again is coming from the Water Data Prize submissions, and then they're making that available to the water systems in their state. So, and I think the last thing I'll say is that we're part of an EPA working group. My colleague Shri, who's on this call, was invited to join that, where we're actually helping make recommendations about the new rule that's forthcoming around water quality communications, specifically the annual water quality report. So we engaged on a number of different channels, locally, state, federally, to make sure that what comes out of this is actually implemented and used in the different ways.
One more question. So if we actually create something, and when do you actually make the decision, and when would the award be?
December 1 is when we'll announce it. Applications are due November 12th.
Or one. All right. And then the funding would be available. So if we went ahead and started a beta of something that fits, is that okay if we start even before we win, when we win?
Yeah, of course. Yeah. Yeah. And if there's improvements, we'll work with you after that implementation phase. I think that's kind of like the phase 2 of the Water Data Prize, is taking what was created and then making it available. So we kind of work hand in hand with the participants.
Got it. And then, so decision is made on the 1st of December. And then if whoever gets selected, the funds would be released within the next.
Yeah. I might have to ask my colleagues. I'm not exactly sure the timing, but I imagine it would be shortly thereafter.
Awesome. In this calendar year.
I assume.
Or not.
Yeah. And you may have said this, but we may extend the deadlines a little bit. And if we do that, it would be to accommodate more prize money and only good things for you. So stay tuned. We'll definitely notify people of that.
So we wouldn't count on until like January or something like that. So when we plan our stuff, we can, it would be for being able to expand it or something. So if we wanted to do it,
yeah.
If we wanted to test it in the fall, we'd be able to roll it out if we were selected.
Yeah.
Awesome. Fantastic. Sounds great. Thank you so much. This is a fantastic.
Kat, just curious, do you think you're going to apply?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay.
And actually we actually have a whole team of people who develop educational programs online, for very specific target audiences. That's what the Virtual Water Education Lab is all about. So we may have multiple team members or students within our lab that we partner with on, so one might be working specifically on helping small and economically disadvantaged utilities. Another one might be working specifically on direct to consumer education or direct to building owner, homeowner, small landlord. There's all sorts of different audiences that we can develop our programs for, because it's online, and so we can target whoever we want to target, right?
Great.
For policymakers, I don't know.
Thanks. And we look forward to seeing it all. That's great. Anyone else have a question out there?
And so if we did have multiple submissions, sorry, I know you want to get to everyone else.
No, that's okay.
If we did have multiple submissions, we just have to specify which
Yeah, so you'll notice, I don't know if folks have clicked through the application form yet, but it allows you to say, I'm submitting for this one. And then it says, do you have more submissions? And then it says, yes. And then you can choose which category each of your submissions go towards.
Okay, and it could be more than one category.
Yes.
Okay. All right, I'll get off and everybody else can ask questions. So, thank you.
No worries.
Well, seeing no questions, that's the end of the Q&A. So thanks everyone for coming, and we may do this again in a month if we have new information or if people are coming up against questions. So maybe we'll do another one of these, but feel free to reach out in the meantime.
Well,
Thank you,
yes.
guys. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Logan.
Thanks. Bye.
Oh, the applause. Thank you, Justin.
Thank you.
Thank you.